Hi guys, welcome back. Hope you all are doing well. Today we'll be discussing a guesstimate. And without further ado, let's get into it. All right. So the question that we have here is that we have to estimate the annual revenue of a multiplex. So again, as we have all been doing in the previous videos, pause the video, take your time, do the guesstimate by yourself, and then continue the video and see how the guesstimate has been done in this particular case. I've taken this guesstimate from the casebook of IIM Ahmedabad 2021 to 2022. And yes, now let's get started. All right, so here are the notes. Starting off, first point is that only cover the substantial revenue streams, the ones that are the most important, the kind of that cover the majority of the revenue, so to say. Second, the footfall will depend on whether it is a weekday or a weekend. Very clear. Third, price can also be considered different for a weekday and weekend. Here, although average price is to be taken, something that has been made clear either by the interviewer or either you can kind of assume it for yourself during the case. Anything would work, even if you want to take different prices and then kind of solve it for different days or whatever the way that you want to go ahead with, feel free. It's completely up to you. But again, at the same time, also remember that overcomplicating your calculations or over kind of detailing, going into too much of details into a guesstimate would only lead to you taking more and more time. Um, and yes, if you're comfortable with that, go ahead. But I would rather suggest that make as clear and as simple assumptions as you could so that throughout the guesstimate you know what is to be done and the interview is also kind of on the same page as yours. All right, so we have the fourth point, which is assume that the revenue from advertising primarily comes from billboards and digital ads between movies. Okay. And the last is the average revenue per screen can be multiplied by the number of screens to obtain the revenue of multiplex. More or less, if you would observe in all five of these nodes, you would have you would be able to relate this. Let's say that if you're talking about price, so we know that the prices are sometimes are different from sometimes are different for weekdays and weekend, and the footfall also kind of depends on a weekday or a weekend. So some things, guesstimates like these, particularly in guesstimates like these, you have this very kind of the good thing about them is that you are also able to relate with your personal experiences, and that is how I would suggest you to kind of take your assumptions, so you would be able to back it and justify it much more in a much more in a better way, in a much more clear way than you would have if the guesstimate is kind of completely is something that you are not able to relate to. All right, so then moving on to the guesstimate or to the approach. So we have the revenue streams divided up into four major buckets. One is ticket sales, parking, food and beverage, and advertising. These four, as you can see, are the four major things that a multiplex would earn its revenue from. The ticket sales are further divided into three major things. Again, a simple mathematical formula: average footfall per show times the average price per show and times the number of shows per day. Average footfall per show, again, since it is kind of broken down, that is what has been done: weekdays Monday to Thursday and weekend Friday to Sunday. All right, so we have basically calculating, as we have assumed that the footfall would be different from weekdays, if we compare with to weekend. So we are basically kind of coming up with an average footfall per day, so for which we have basically made a table, divided weekdays and weekends, and then we have the seating capacity. Of course, it will be the same throughout weekdays and weekends because the halls are the same. The average occupancy rate is what has been changing, which is what to be assumed as 60% for weekdays and 75% for weekends. And so the average footfall that we have is 60% of 300, which is 180 for weekdays, 75% for weekends, which is 300 again, then 225. Summing up, and now we are taking in weighted average method. Basically, we're not just kind of summing 180 and 25 and dividing them by 2. We are basically taking the weighted average. Weighted average is what? We are multiplying 180 by 4. 4 is the number of weekdays. And then we are multiplying 225 by 3, the number of weekends. And then we are adding them up and dividing them by 7. 7 is the number of days in a week to obtain a total number of 220, to obtain a total number of 200, which is the weighted average footfall per show in a week. All right, so the second revenue is parking. Third is food and beverage, very clear in itself. Fourth is advertising. As we've mentioned in the assumption, advertising again split into two different segments: billboards and digital ads. Now, this is the approach. This is the structure that you should have laid down out before starting off with the guesstimate or before calculating the guesstimate. Every time in a guesstimate, it's easy or it's better for you to kind of lay down your approach first, talk it out properly, and then kind of tell to the interviewer that this is what you have in mind. Sometimes what also happens is that the interviewer is kind of so satisfied with the approach that they won't ask you to do the calculation. They will move to another topic. Or in case of a paucity of time, if you kind of go and brief the interviewer about the approach, the interviewer might not ask you to run the math basically. All right, so then moving on to the final, no, moving on. I'm really sorry. It's not a question. Moving on to the final calculation. Just a second. Yes. So moving on with the final calculation, we have the average daily revenue per screen, which is what we're calculating in the first step. To calculate that, we have the ticket sales revenue per day. We basically have four different kind of calculations to be done to kind of get the average daily revenue per screen, which are as per the approach that we've taken in the previous slide. Ticket sales revenue, parking revenue, food and beverage revenue, and the advertising revenue. Moving on, starting off with the ticket sales revenue per day. Very again, now, this particular guesstimate very mathematical, full of mathematical formula, very basic. Let's say in ticket sales revenue per day, we have the average footfall per day times the average price per show times the number of shows in a day. So very basic formula. Now, kind of in this particular one, since kind of there are a lot of things that you are to assume basically, so just make sure that you are also able to clearly justify to the interviewer that why you're taking four number of shows per day, not three, not five, so on and so forth. In any case, that since particularly in this case, since this is something that you can relate to, you can also come up and say that this is what you observe. This is out of your observation and your analysis. That on an average, in an average multiplex, irrespective of whatever location it is, there are four shows in a day, or there are three cineplex, or there are three kind of halls, so on and so forth. So in this particular case, average footfall per day, average price per show, number of shows per day, very basic. Average footfall per day as we have calculated 200, average price per show 250, and number of shows in a day is 4, coming up to a total of rupees 2 lakh. Then the second point is revenue from parking per week. So again, a similar approach. We calculate the average footfall per show. Then we take a percentage of the people who use parking. Not everyone who comes to a cineplex, multiplex, sorry, would use parking, right? So the percentage of people who use parking times the number of shows per day and times finally the average ticket per size. So in all of these formulas, if you see what are we calculating, the very basic, it is price times quantity. That what is the price, what is the average ticket size times the people, times the number of people who will be kind of availing that particular service is what we're calculating, if you see it from a macro perspective, right? So price we have is average ticket size. How many people would be using it is average footfall per show, the total people who will be, the total number of people who will be coming to watch the movie per show times the number of people who will be using the parking, percentage of people, sorry, times the number of shows in a day is what we have together collectively as the quantity, as the number of people who will be availing parking, right? Times, if we kind of multiply it by average ticket size, we have 200 times 0.5. That means 50% of people are using parking times four number of shows in a day, as we have assumed previously, times 50 rupees for the parking comes up to a total of rupees 20,000. The third one is advertising revenue. So instead of calculating the whole advertising revenue, we've just basically assumed it as 10% of the total revenue. A very clever way to do it, because in any case, this particular guesstimate could be is kind of divided into three different guesstimates of its own, right? So might be because of paucity of time, or might be because the interviewer has said so. You are simply dividing, or you're simply kind of making an adjustment, a very kind of good way to kind of go on and do the guesstimate. If in case the interviewer asks you to kind of properly solve this particular part as well, again take the similar approach of how many shows or how many movies the kind of the multiplex would be having, billboards or run digital ads. So in this particular case, 10% of the total revenue, good idea. Fourth is food and beverage. So average footfall, again, price times quantity. We have quantity, which is the average footfall per show, percentage of people who buy food and beverage, and the number of shows per day times the price, which is average ticket size, which is 200 times 0.5, 50% buying it, times 4 number of people, number of shows per day, times 150. Now, again, something that you can change by yourself if you feel that 150 is too less of money, basically, or too high of money to charge for food and beverage, you can feel free to adjust it accordingly. Which brings us to a total of average daily revenue per screen, which is rupees 4.2 lakh. Now, what we have to calculate is the total revenue for the multiplex in a year, total annual revenue, right? So again, a very simple formula. We have the average daily revenue per screen, which is 4.2 lakh, multiplied by the number of screens, which is 4, times the number of days, which has been taken as 300. Now, why 300? Again, if you feel so, you can kind of increase it, decrease it, whatever kind of way that you feel to do so, feel free to do so. Why in this particular case they have taken 300 is because they're taking into account some days where the footfall is extremely low, or some shows where the footfall is extremely low. Let's say that it's a Monday morning, the footfall would be extremely low. Let's say that it's very late night shows or very early morning shows, the footfall would be very less. So to average those out, or to discount basically those factors, the footfall, the number of days has been taken as 300. All right, so the total figure that we have is 4.2 lakh times 4 times 300, which gives us 5,040 crore or 40 lakhs, which brings us to 50.4 crores. All right, so I hope this was all for the guesstimate. I hope it was clear to you. Again, the approach first, lay down the approach first, then do the final math. And with that, I wish you all the best. Hope that this I was able to add some value. And yes, bye bye.